May I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen. Please be seated. I was recently reading the reflections of a renowned Christian author and Catholic priest, written from the serene quiet of Genesee Monastery in upstate New York, where he was passing an extended time of retreat and renewal. He writes about the things you might expect someone new to a monastery to write about, the comforts and things and people he misses being so far away, so far removed, how the passing of time changes when immersed in the daily office, those 7 lovely liturgies monks observe at regular intervals throughout the day, the monotony of manual labor, in his case, washing thousands of raisins for their bakery, when in his regular life, he's a professor at an Ivy League university, and the allure and alarming strangeness of so much silence. But many, many pages, more than you might think, are dedicated to his lament about the state of the world and his prayers for those most in peril. Even nestled in the bucolic beauty of the natural world, monks have access to news in nearby towns. They talk to and write with their families and friends. And so interspersed with thoughts on the saints of the day, or a particularly moving conversation with the abbot, he expresses his anxiety about the rise of so many dictatorial leaders in the world, the terrible human rights abuses perpetrated in various places, and the diminishing confidence people seem to have in democratic ideals and progress. After a few days of intense labor harvesting the wheat and watching golden grains be loaded onto train beds, he thinks about the famines plaguing parts of Africa, the lives being lost, the cultures and economies being upended, and his heart breaks in particular for the children, hungry, starving, for so much more than just food. As he muses about what baking bread for hours on end has to teach him about God and creation and life, he ends with some notes on all the scandals in Washington, the chaos of the White House, and the rumors that the president will soon resign. It was 1974, after all, and Watergate had gripped the nation, and over 300,000 people in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia were perishing as the result of a devastating drought that caused widespread famine and massive displacement. And the Chilean coup of 1973, which resulted in a military dictatorship, led to a great deal of reporting in the US on the torture and disappearance of civilians there. It was 1974, and the author was Henry Nouwen, a celebrated pastoral and practical theologian whose teaching has shaped generations of Christian thinkers and believers. It was 1974, but his anxiety is so resonant, his lament so familiar, his sadness and grief and sense of powerlessness as contemporary as can be. I frequently hear people talk about how the rise of social media and the 24-hour news cycle and the countless ways we can access information now have led to higher levels of concern about the state of our communities and our world. But from time to time, it's good to remember that even if the intensity of this has increased, the reality is itself not new. The world is always pulling itself apart at the seams. People are perpetually repeating the mistakes of the past. And this is terribly distressing to witness, but it is also not surprising. Which is part of why it is such a relief for us as Christians to proclaim that our faith is not in the world, that our hope is not in people alone, which is not to say that we don't care for our hurting or our hungry neighbors or our imperiled planet, but that how and why we care and where we turn for inspiration and sustenance really matters. Jesus also lived in a terribly troubling and trying time. The suffering of the world was not far away and foreign, but urgent, closer even than his iPhone screen, close enough to touch and smell and feel, but also close enough to heal. When we find Jesus this morning, he has been out and about doing what he was always doing, teaching and healing, teaching and healing. He's just called the 12 disciples, given them authority over the spirits, and sent them out, 2 by 2, to do more of the same. And now they are coming back to him. Tired, no doubt, distraught perhaps, but maybe enlivened or amazed by the things they were able to accomplish, the things they had seen, the lives they had touched, and the ways their lives had been touched in return. Eagerly, they share all of this with Jesus, their beloved friend and mentor, and he sees them, so earnest, so exhausted, and says, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." Take a moment to really hear that. The disciples have been out doing good and grading and godly work, and no doubt they have barely made a dent in the hardship of those around them, their love and care and kindness but a drop in the ocean of sickness and stress and insanity and grief that so often defines human life. And Jesus knows that there is more work to be done, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. But in that moment of return, Jesus does not say, "Welcome back, guys. I've packed some bagged lunches for you. Hope you like PB&J on whole wheat. Now let's get back out there and show them who's boss. Are you with me?" No, he says, "Well done, good and faithful friend. It's time for a rest." It seems to me that one of the great lies of our times is that you and I and everyone are basically highly complex machines. We eat because, like machines, we need fuel to be productive. We drink coffee and smoke cigarettes and take supplements or stimulants because, like machines, we want to boost our performance. We learn and think and acquire knowledge in order to accomplish the tasks set before us more efficiently and more effectively. Sleep, an unfortunate design flaw. Human connection, essentially optional. Love, warmth, emotions, generally obstacles to the task at hand. At best, distractions. It is a terrible way of looking at the world and at our lives. But if we really pay attention to the assumptions driving our advertising industry or defining norms for work and play, we don't have to work hard to see this lie before us. But the truth, of course, is we aren't machines, and we weren't gifted with this glorious life and blessed with the companionship of one another and immersed in such a breathtakingly beautiful and bracing world just to do and make and buy more and more and more. As hard as it is to extricate ourselves from this lie, because it is so pervasive and so persuasive, some part of us rebels. Some part of us knows we are creatures of dignity and grace, creatures of the earth with material needs and wants and desires that are good and glorious, creatures intimately connected with one another and our Creator, creatures created in the very image of God. This truth is asserted over and over in the Bible, and one of its defining concerns is rest. God's self takes a day of rest after doing the hard and holy work of creating the universe. God then hallows that day and commends it to us as a sacred discipline, the Sabbath. And then God also commands us to not only rest ourselves, but to give the earth a rest on a regular cycle, to let it lie fallow 1/7 of the time, because there is something about rest that is not only good and godly, but that leads to generativity and generosity, to fruitfulness and to flourishing. And then God says, don't only do that, but every 49th year, take an entire year off to dedicate to worship and praise and renewal. And on that year, cancel all your debts, free anyone in bondage to you, practice prodigal forgiveness, because there is also something in rest that makes for justice and mercy, that brings us closer to ourselves. Maybe it's because we are so powerless in the face of our need for rest, because it's so inexplicable and so essential and just not optional, which reveals our common humanity. Maybe it's because when we take those moments to pause, to step back, we see the world anew, and we notice how dependent we are on God and others and the earth. And there's something wonderful and fearfully freeing in that. Maybe it's because when we slow down and get quiet, we reconnect with that rebellious part, that one rooted in God, God's own spirit within us. Honestly, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure it matters. Maybe it is all of the above. What matters is that this morning we have Jesus reminding us of our gifted and grace-filled vulnerability and dependence, telling his friends, "Thank you for your going out and your coming in, and now it is time to tend your body and your mind and your spirit, because that matters to me too." So they do. They go away to a deserted place by themselves. And you know what Jesus does? He keeps on teaching and healing. Teaching and healing. God works in and with and through us to be present in the suffering of the world and to accomplish transformation. But God also keeps that up even when we need a break. Now, I'm not saying that we are only called to lives of rest and retreat, delightful as a good massage or a day of golf or a few weeks at a monastery are. But neither are we called to lives that don't include these things. Just as we are invited to participate in the remaking of the world, ushering in God's kingdom, we are called to tend our creaturely needs and to set time aside to reconnect with our source and our sustainer. Otherwise, we'll be too tired to notice when we slip into overdriven doing, as though we have to prove our worth or goodness or earn our place in God's family, as if the fate of the world rests firmly on our shoulders and ours alone. We'll be too disoriented to notice and name the things that are simply wrong and to stand up for ourselves and others when called upon to do so. We'll be too unmoored to recognize the lies the world tells us all the time, and eventually we'll wind up too depressed or burned out or addicted, codependent, perfectionistic, demanding, angry, righteously indignant, or apathetic to really bear God's love and God's light in this world. I've had the opportunity to retreat in several monastic communities over the last 15 years, and one thing I'm always reminded of when I'm there is that there is always someone, somewhere in this world, at prayer on behalf of me and everyone else, who is holding all of us in holy hope, and that even when I am sleeping, there are others who are teaching and healing, who are carrying on the ministry of Christ. There's a sobering sacredness in being reminded that I am part of a larger body, and that God is working for the good, and that my small offering really matters, just as the small offering of everyone really matters. Thomas Merton, who largely brought contemplative practice back to Western Christianity in the mid-20th century, also spent many years in a Trappist monastery in rural Kentucky. After one of his first extended stays in the monastery, Merton had to visit Louisville, and when he did, he found re-entering the busy world as disorienting as entering the monastery had been at first. So fast and noisy and full was it. And he was also amazed to realize how being in the monastery, how having that time away, changed how he saw the city and its people. There he stood at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the middle of a bustling shopping district, as people rushed from one thing to another, a coffee in hand, a meeting about to start, running late, running long, running. And he was, and I quote, suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers, simply because we share the world of the bomb, the world of race hatred, the world of technology, the world of mass media, of big business, revolution, and all the rest. Merton, a predecessor of Nouwen's, was writing in the 1950s. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But here's the point. What he was feeling, this reorientation, this recalibration, he describes it as the immense joy of being human, a member of a race in which God's self became incarnate. And he writes, if only everybody could see this, but it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. We are called to be bearers of God's light and God's love in the world. And we are also called to tend the love and light already within us. There's no telling people that they have this in them, but here's a secret, just in case. You too are shining like the sun. Amen.